All right. A little settled here. Hello, how are you? Thank you for your practice. Thank you for being here. Probably not a good angle. We joked about that. So let's just take a deep breath together. We anchor in this beautiful practice that we experience together, and I'm so grateful for Dallas Meditation Center. I have known Cornell and Bobby for many years, knew Brother Chising. I'm so grateful for the light that he provided that is still sustained here. And thank you, June, for all that you do here, for everybody here. Hello, Josh and Cornell. So in contemplating what to have a conversation with you about, I was so touched by the movie, the documentary with the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, that I decided to have the conversation around mission joy. And we're going to watch the trailer, which is about 2 minutes, because I feel it's really important to get the energy and essence of these two luminaries, these two men of peace, one Buddhist, one Christian. And what you'll see is the playfulness between them. Desmond Tutu's daughter said it's like watching two 8-year-old boys. And it's contagious. And yet these two men have suffered enormously and have witnessed suffering. And so the whole premise of the documentary is like, how do you find happiness in troubled times? And especially after watching all that's been happening in the world, and then that devastating earthquake in Turkey, it's always in my heart. It's like that light of joy that's ever present, but sometimes I can shadow it with guilt sometimes, or overwhelm with that secondary trauma of seeing so much suffering. And then after watching this was just that reminder of how important it is to cultivate that joy, because that's what really gives us that strength to do what's necessary to do. So Joshua is going to load up the video on YouTube. It's about a little over 2 minutes. So that way, if you haven't seen the documentary, I've been watching it on Netflix. Oh, that's cool. just that effervescent laughter that sustains them and all that they've experienced and do. And I can't imagine what the Dalai Lama does. We have like so I'm going to touch on 3 of the points from that documentary before we actually get to joy, because it's really important that we understand that we all suffer and that delusions are inexhaustible, as the Buddha said, but we can transform them. And it's the practice and the tools and the practice and the practice and the practice. And I can say the practice 10,000 times. So Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu talk about first reframing your mindset. In Buddhist psychology, the Dalai Lama said that you learn to meet the situation from a different angle. Because if you're in anger and resentment and bitterness, you perpetuate whatever you've already been suffering. And once again, the practice is the process. And the 3 things that we're going to talk about, reforming your mindset, forgiveness is a sign of strength, and suffering is an opportunity first, does not mean that it's easy. And it does not mean that it's immediate. It takes time. Grief has its own timeline. Suffering impacts us on such a deep level. But when they talk about reframing your mindset, they both said it's a new opportunity to learn. Now, when you're in the midst of the fire and something's happening, unless you're very enlightened, I know my first thought isn't like, wow, what a great opportunity. I'm suffering, something new and something good is going to come from this. I'm usually just pretty present to what I'm experiencing and allowing those difficult emotions and experience to be present. But it's in that cultivation, that distilling of the energy, that I'm able to literally slowly transform my inner awareness to the inside and the opportunity. Because if I change the way that I see the world or the situation through my practice, then I can transform the energy to free myself. And so they invite us to think of the bright side of the situation. And like I said, not right when you're right in the middle of the fire, but think of something that's not too intense in your life. And they say, imagine like time travel, and 5 years from now, what do you think you would think about that situation? And it's funny because I actually did that in my my late teens, my early 20s, when you think you're in love and you break up and it's hard and you're suffering. This is a very light example. But I remember just my heart being so broken. I thought, I wonder what I'm going to feel like when I'm 30. And fast forwarding, just to try to imagine. And what it does, it diffuses the energy, but it's not a bypass. Not a bypass of your experience. It's not a diminishing of your experience. And the other thing I'm really clear about is that we don't compare suffering. Even my medical doctor said that when she was talking about, well, how were you during the pandemic and isolation? I'm like, well, yeah, I experienced, some loneliness. I was taking care of my parents. I go, but at least I was grateful to have my apartment. She goes, stop. What did you experience during the pandemic? So not to bypass it. But then you can get to that point where when you reframe your mindset, it does become this opportunity of opening your awareness to the possibilities of not only the healing to arrive, but the transformation to really settle. Because it takes a lot of time for that energy to metabolize and to move through. And so reframing your mindset opens you up to the present moment. And as the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu said, it opens you up to greater and deeper joy to sustain you. The other deep topic they went into is that forgiveness is a sign of strength. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, forgiveness is a sign of strength. Those who say forgiving is a sign of weakness haven't tried it. And over, the Dalai Lama, he's like 100%, 1,000% wrong when people say forgiveness is a weakness. He goes, it's a strength. He goes, once you can get control over the negative thing and thinking, and you don't stay in anger or hate, then you have been refined. And you put yourself in the shoes of others, and then you're able then to have that lens of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a potent and sometimes difficult process when you're first in an experience. I had the great privilege of meeting Azim Khamisa, whose son was murdered in 1995 by a 14-year-old gang member. We brought him to Dallas for an event. And this was 1995, and he's a Sufi Muslim. And through the process of daily forgiveness, even through the depths of the pain, he said he felt like his whole life force literally was sucked out of him when he got that news. It was his 9-month practice of forgiveness. And he said in his tradition, they tell the story not to get attention, not to have people feel sorry for them, but to bring to the awareness the loss, the trauma, but then to allow this forgiveness to literally wash over you. And Azim, 2023, so how many years is that? 1995 to 2023. Every day has forgiven Tony Hicks, the 14-year-old who's now in his 30s or older, who murdered his son. He met him. He works with him. Tony's out of prison and is a volunteer at his organization. But that process of forgiveness took a lot of time and became Azim's strength. And Plez, Tony's grandfather, where they worked together so they could end the cycle of violence for other children, to stop killing other children. And so forgiveness as a strength does not mean it's easy. And once again, it's not a bypass, it's a process. Because in order to move that energy out and then to find that joy in the simplest things of life, I actually have to be present to the process. And forgiveness as a strength allows me to make space for new opportunities, to make space to have an understanding of the suffering that the other person must be experiencing in order for them to be perpetuating suffering. I always say it's unhealed and unskilled behavior that continues to just perpetuate suffering. And where in my life have I perpetuated suffering out of my unhealed and unskilled way to forgive myself? And so the process of forgiveness is just taking a look at what is happening within what the situation was to allow that energy to be released and transmuted so something good comes from it, even though the thing that happened was not good. I mean, think about it. The Dalai Lama is a refugee, still, in India, he says. And the horrific violence and loss of life of the Tibetan culture. And yet he'll tell you that instead of just being in his palace, he's been able then actually to not only share the Dharma, but to cultivate greater compassion and understanding and awareness of how we don't look within to heal the suffering's perpetuated in the world. But the Dharma was unleashed because of him going to India. And so forgiveness, once again, is that process of trying to understand once you're able to move out of the energy and the emotion a little bit higher, that this person is also, has the Buddha nature, the Christ nature, whatever, your understanding of this infinite intelligence, but they don't know it because they wouldn't be causing suffering if they did. And as he says, to walk in their shoes. So forgiveness is a sign of strength, but it's not an easy process. And then they say suffering is an opportunity. Nothing beautiful in the end comes without a measure of some pain, some frustration, says Archbishop Desmond. And the Dalai Lama says, you see suffering as a problem, but it's the opportunity testing you. And once again, when you're in the midst of suffering, unless you're highly evolved, which I'm not, it might not be your first thought, oh, this opportunity. But through the process, he says, he goes, you can turn this thing on its head, and where it was going to take you to have it be your enemy, you can turn it into an ally. He says, if there are no difficulties, then we get too relaxed and complaining. Dr. Edith Eger, I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly, was on Brene Brown, and she is a Holocaust survivor who wrote 2 books, The Choice and the Gift. She was 16 when she went to Auschwitz. And her and her sister went one way. Her parents were immediately killed in the gas chambers. She experienced the horrors, the trauma, the violence. She experienced that unbelievable projection of being treated like she wasn't human. But through her process of healing and forgiveness, she can now say, through many, many years, she said, of practice, that suffering was an opportunity. We don't have to have that kind of suffering to awaken. But she was able to turn it into an opportunity because she's like, I am not a victim, I'm a survivor. And she too could see the suffering that was going on for that kind of ignorance to create such violence. Because when we're in the midst of suffering, it's usually when I'm about 10 yards, 20 yards out of it, can I turn around and say, okay, now I understand, or now this is how I've grown, or this is what I've learned, and this is how I want to share in the world from that. So suffering as an opportunity, once again, not a bypass, not an immediate process, but when you're able to, once again, move that through that energy, you can find like, so what is the gift in the moment? And how am I going to be a beneficial presence and teach compassion? And how am I going to see how other people are suffering because they've lost their joy? And so this brings us to the joy then, because their whole premise is we've got to cultivate that joy within. Cannot let anything that's happening take our light, steal our light. That in cultivating that joy within, we can find these opportunities that, who said the blooming flowers was their thing? Yes, that moment of the blooming flowers in spring is that opportunity that no matter what's happening, to pause into that moment and allow that joy to wash over you. That joy when you are around, or at least I have the joy of being around a lot of children and their effervescent laughter, just like the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, that energy of just joy and laughter that then fills you up with this strength and vitality so then you can carry forward in the day. What I love about this documentary is that they are very clear that they have both not only experienced and witnessed suffering, but they're also, that was what empowered them to lead both their movements for compassion, for freedom, for understanding and connection. And that joy is that touchstone of truth that gives them that strength. Because sometimes when things are so devastating, it's challenging, to find any joy in the moment. And that's our opportunity. Because I always said, I go, no matter what is happening in the world, no one or no thing can steal my joy. No one, no thing can steal my joy. So with this movement for Mission Joy, I haven't signed up for it yet because I want to make sure I'm available, but it's like 7 days, you'll get an email and every day they give you a prompt of cultivating that joy. Because when you watch, I call them brothers because they're like brothers. When you watch the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu with their laughter and their joy and their support of each other, that's a strength that's necessary in this world. And sometimes we can get so overwhelmed with what's happening in our personal lives, what we watch on the news, what we're seeing in the world, that we can forget to cultivate that joy and that practice, not only for ourselves, but especially for others. Because we depend on each other. Interdependent, interbeing. We wouldn't be here without each other. We actually need each other. We're necessary for each other. And when we can wake up to that well-being and cultivate that joy for not only ourselves, but others, then that suffering will cease. So they give us 4 opportunities for cultivating joy. So 1, kindness. All right, so we know everybody talks about kindness, but it says do a small thing to help someone else, all right? And do 5 things in one day that make you stronger and for the week. But I first want you to think about a moment that somebody was kind to you and it made a difference in your life. And how did that feel? And when you bring that into your heart, then think, how can I have this opportunity then to show more kindness? A smile, a hello, a woman sitting on the corner by City Hospital that I made a U-turn to go. She was dressed in black. She had on a red scarf. I could tell she was European. She didn't speak a lick of English. All she said was Russia, Ukraine. And I give her this beautiful, like multicolored shawl that my mother made, and I wrapped it around her because it was a cold day, and just her face lit up. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I went in and I got money and I gave her money and we couldn't communicate. And she just kept smiling and hugging me. And she's like, no. And I'm like, yes. And of course, I don't know what her spiritual background is, but anytime you point up to the sky, you think heaven, right? Or something good. So I just said so. And she's like, she was weeping, but the joy that she was filled with, and then the joy that I was filled with to meet this person who I did not know. And to, in that moment, let her know that she was seen, that she belonged, and that she was loved in that moment. If you could see the joy that I saw in her eyes and the joy that it brought to me, that was a healing moment. And normally I don't share stories like that, but it was so powerful. So this week, 5 things of kindness that you can do. Gratitude, always that listing of gratitude. So they say, they actually have scientific studies for all of this, the changing of the brain, that it is optimal for us when we feel gratitude to be joyful. So you're cultivating joy. So turn around to your neighbor and just one thing that you're grateful for. Turn around to your neighbor. I know I'm running just a little bit over time, so I'll try to wrap it up. But one thing, turn around to each other. One thing you're grateful for. Josh, what are you grateful for?
Stick veil.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Yes. So kindness, gratitude, right? Can you feel the energy? We already talked about reframing. So if there's a situation, something that you can imagine 5 years from now, because they say when you look for the silver linings, it makes you feel better. And when you notice one silver lining, you will most likely notice more. So once again, reframing your mindset. And then connection, which is what you're doing right here. Connection. It says send a friend a text message, I'll make them smile, or reach out to a family member, but re-engage with an established group, it says, online or in person. And there are signs behind that it supports our mental and physical health and the amount and quality of human connection we have, because we are born to connect. I heard someone say that it's like, we are in our mother's wombs. We were born into this world connected. And so connection is a way to cultivate that joy. So we have suffering, the 4 noble truths. We got the pathway out of suffering, but the simplicity of actually being present to the suffering, reframing the mindset, cultivating forgiveness, seeing it as an opportunity, not when you're in the fire of it, but when you can move out of it. It's like, what came from this? What good came from this that I can then share with others? And then these random acts of kindness, a smile, a luminous smile. You have no idea, we're so, society has become so inward and we don't trust each other that people first don't trust you. They think you're a little weird, or at least maybe that's what they do with me. But then they realize you're being genuinely, sincerely connecting with them. And of course, just being in a group together and inviting people whose unique background you don't know about yet, and listening and asking questions. So the mission for joy always begins within. It's an inside out job. When suffering is present, we bear witness to it. Then we use our practice to allow us to tend to our hearts and our minds and our soul, so that we can then distill that into something that can bloom for the good. And then these random acts of kindness, this attitude of gratitude. With the kids, it's like attitude of gratitude makes me feel good. Attitude of gratitude puts me in a good mood. That's what we sing with the kids. And they always smile, we always smile. And it's just finding that one thing in the midst of grief. I remember just that one thing that would just bring this light within me out. So it gave me the strength to continue, to be compassionate with myself, but especially compassionate with others. So I really invite you to watch this documentary. It'll make you laugh and it'll make you cry. Celebrate this beautiful friendship of the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. To understand that when we are in our joy, we're not causing suffering. So if we cultivate more joy and we bring that joy into the world, there literally is scientific evidence that there's a ripple effect of that. And when we are having the difficult experiences, someone in the process of dying, the loss, the challenges at work, just growing older. Because in a minute, my knees are going to tell me about suffering when I try to get up. But to be present to it with tenderness and love and kindness, that we can then offer to the world our compassionate awareness, our compassionate presence. It begins with being compassionate to ourselves. And then that we understand that what we say, what we do, how we meet each other in the moment, even if it's just for one moment, the impression we can make on each other with love and joy will transform the world from the inside out. So I just invite you into a week of kindness, into a week of gratitude, into learning how just to reframe, creating connection, coming here as much as possible, going deeper with yourself and your practice, and to know that when someone is causing harm, they are suffering. And my job is not to allow it, not to say that it's okay, but to stand in my truth, but then to bring my strength, which is cultivated by the inner joy, that we transmute it so that what we see now then can be literally a life and a world that works for everyone. So the joy within, the compassion when they're suffering, the laughter that transmutes, all karma. I think they probably birthed together 10,000 universes from all their laughter, and the gratitude to have a place to practice. And especially when you're having a hard time, please come and allow yourself to be held in the sacred space. I thank you. I bless you. I apologize for going over. It'll take me a moment to get up. So Josh, sing a song. Are you gonna sing here? Okay.
I really enjoy as resilience and our community. Yes, so grateful. And I thought, will you have messages or same messages that you took to your heart? This is an opportunity for you to ask a question or share your reflection on her talk to Veronica. And at Dallas Meditation Center, once again, to promote deep listening, we follow the format of bowing, saying our names, saying our shares, or asking questions and bowing out. And Veronica, if this one bowing in collision happens at the same time, I leave it to you to choose who to go. And for those of you who are on Zoom, please use the reaction button at the bottom of the screen to raise your hand, and Joshua would relay the bowing in to Veronica.